Okay, we've crossed over to 2 minutes past, and so that's my cue to get us started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the second session of our four-part Nature-Based Solutions for Business webinar series, kindly supported by our member company, One Carbon World. Before we get stuck into the content, we do have a bit of housekeeping to cover off. Firstly, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you and made available on our website along with key takeaways. So you can watch for that in the days after the series, the session, I think, after today. We've activated automatic captions, which you can choose to accept in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. These captions are generated automatically by Zoom, so please do forgive any typos or mistakes that are made by the program. We are in webinar mode, and that means attendees will be muted and not visible on screen throughout the session, but we still are very keen to hear from you. So do please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're from, how the weather is. We're happy for you to share your LinkedIn profile, however you see fit. And obviously, most welcome to comment on what you're hearing, and definitely also use the chat to tell us about any technical issues you might be experiencing. At the bottom of the chat, there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen, and at the bottom of that, you can indicate to whom you're sending your message, either to just the hosts or to everyone. So do please have a look there. Here, and let me get things started as well by saying hi from cloudy Brighton this morning. And I'm just popping my LinkedIn connection into the chat. I'm really happy to connect with anyone that's working in this space. Okay. We are also planning, though, to have lots of time for a Q&A at the end of our presentations. We're keen to answer your questions, and if you want your question to be answered, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and that's the place to put questions for our panelists. If you post a question in the chat, we are not able to move it over to the Q&A as hosts. You need to do that, and you will get a reminder to do that, but save everyone a bunch of work. Put your questions in the Q&A box in the first place. And we have another task. Even if you don't have a question, we ask you to please keep an eye on the Q&A box, because we want you to vote for the questions you'd like us to prioritize. We do often get more questions than we have time to answer. And so to ensure that we're speaking about the issues that are most important to you, if you would give a thumbs up to the questions you'd like us to prioritize, that would be very, very helpful indeed. Okay, that's, I think, all we have for housekeeping today. So let's move on to the next slide. With conflict raging in Gaza, in Ukraine, and many other regions of the world, we'd like to just take this opportunity to remind you of the UN Global Compact human rights principles and urge you to ensure that your company is not complicit in human rights abuses through your direct operations or your supply chain. If you or your company are able to support UN agencies bringing relief to people in need, please do take a look at the links that have been shared in the chat. All right, let's go on to our next slide, please. Just a little bit about the UN Global Compact in case you've not been on one of our webinars in the past. UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative with over 25,000 global participants who have made a CEO commitment to uphold our 10 principles. These universal principles are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and they represent a blueprint for sustainable business. Here at the UK network and at our fellow Global Compact country networks around the world, it is our mission to turn global momentum on sustainability into practical country-level action. Here in the UK, we have three main work streams: environment, social, and governance. We host well over 100 events every year to try and inspire ambition, to enable action, and to shape the ecosystem in which business operates to help enable sustainable business. If you're not already a member of the UN Global Compact, I would strongly encourage you to consider joining, and you can find some more information on how to join through the link that's just been posted in the chat. Let's go to the next slide, please. A key part of our mission is to drive business engagement with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we always take a moment at the start of our presentations to flag which goals we're going to be talking about. And today, the session is especially linked to goals 11, 13, 15, and 17. If you're not already familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, again, urge you to have a look. A really, really important agenda for sustainable business. Okay, and now on to why we're here today and what you can expect to learn from this whole webinar series, and then in particular today's session. We've developed this series to provide practical guidance on how companies can choose, implement, and finance a range of nature-based solutions in line with their commercial and sustainability priorities, and as closely as possible in line with the principles underpinning the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. Last week, we kicked off the series with a session on land-based solutions. We covered the business case for implementing and investing in nature-based solutions and heard from leading companies such as Scottish Power Renewables and Reckitt on how they are incorporating solutions like peatland restoration techniques and regenerative agriculture to sequester carbon, address their impacts on nature, and regenerate critical landscapes. We also heard from a representative from the IUCN on the principles that companies should look to align with as part of designing and implementing nature-based solutions to ensure that they are sustainable and deliver both environmental and societal benefits. If you missed the session and want to catch up on the recording, we recommend that you do so by following the link that Sarah has posted in the chat. There it is. I think it'd be well worth your time to tune in there. Now we have, I think, 2 more webinars coming up in the series exploring various types of nature-based solutions that can be implemented across urban, freshwater, and marine environments, as well as a final session on how the private sector can contribute towards closing the finance gap so that nature-based solutions can be deployed at scale. So if you haven't already done so, be sure to register for all of the sessions by clicking on the link in the chat. You do need to register for each session separately. Registering for one doesn't automatically get you signed up for the rest. Now, today, we're going to focus on urban solutions. We'll be looking at examples of nature-based solutions that businesses can incorporate into the built environment, either as part of developing a new build, retrofitting an existing building, or for those businesses that might be operating in rented offices and unable to implement a green wall or a green roof. We'll be highlighting examples of solutions that they can invest in to enhance the resilience of urban environments. We have a fantastic panel of speakers lined up to bring these examples to life. First, we're going to hear from Kai Liebetanz, Head of Nature at the UK Green Building Council. Then we've got Tom Butterworth, Director and Nature Lead, UKIMEA at Arup. And then Charlotte Markey, Green Urbanisation Innovation Manager at Polypipe. And then a bit of a double act, Monica Esposito West, Business Development Manager at Earthwatch Europe, and Reem Aki, the ESG Manager at Funding Circle, will be talking about a partnership that they're engaged in. Okay, and now that's more than enough from me. I am now delighted to hand over to Kai to kick us off with a bit of an introduction to urban nature-based solutions and some of the values and drivers for implementing them. Kai, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. And thanks for the UN Global Compact for inviting me. It is an honor to speak today. I'm Kai Liebetanz, Head of Nature and Resource Use here at UKGBC. And I'll just set the scene by looking at the value that nature-based solutions can bring and a little bit of what the drivers are behind them. Considering I've only got 10 minutes, let's dive straight in. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we're looking here is just some of the drivers behind the uptake of nature-based solutions, specifically for businesses. The way we usually structure them at UKGBC is according to that slide. So we see policy drivers. This is mainly focused in the UK as we're here at the UK network today. Biodiversity net gain is a key driver. If you look at London, things like the urban greening factor are a big driver behind that. And then different local plans of different local councils have often their own requirements, whether this is additional B&G requirements that go over and above the 10% or other general urban greening and nature-based solutions requirements. We then also have ESG drivers. That would be things like TCFD, reducing the exposure to climate risks and disclosing in what fashion you are exposed to climate risk through your portfolio. It might be things like delivering on a corporate strategy and your commitments within that and your KPIs, or generally corporate reputation as well. Now, then we have value drivers, which according to me are the strongest ones by far. So these are things like creating lasting value for society, increasing the quality of life in cities and communities, and adapting to climate change. Next slide, please. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, what do we mean? Here at UKGBC, we often focus, specifically in the context of this webinar here today, we focus on urban nature-based solutions. And as part of urban nature-based solutions, we are looking at these ones here generally. Sustainable urban drainage systems, urban parks and green spaces, street trees, green roofs, green walls. It's important to note that there are other nature-based solutions, especially when we're looking at the non-urban NBS. For those of you who joined the previous webinar that Steve has just alluded to, you're probably familiar with what these might be. Just as example, mangroves, for example, they are an excellent nature-based solution for coastal protection. However, today we're focusing on the urban realm. On the next slide, we have a little bit of a look at why are nature-based solutions so popular at the moment, and why is there so much focus on them? One of the reasons definitely is because of how multifaceted they are. Just before, when I was talking about the value drivers, I was mentioning improvements of quality of life and creating value for society. This is kind of what we mean. This is what we're looking at. What you see here is we internally always call this the benefit wheel. These are the primary benefits that nature-based solutions can deliver. So these are things like improving air quality or improving microclimate, especially important during heat waves, for example. Flood prevention, improving water quality and water quantity. I mean, we see Central Europe at the moment being under massive flooding, so nature-based solutions can help with that to a certain extent. And then also things like bringing nature and biodiversity back to our cities with benefits for health and well-being, and also the potential to stimulate local economies. On the next slide, we see what we've done here is basically a comparison between what we call grey infrastructure and a green infrastructure. So in that case, we're looking at flood prevention. So on the left side, you see a conventional drainage system. So that will be something like a water attenuation tank, for example. And on the right side, you see SUDS, or sustainable drainage system, with as a nature-based solution. Now, what we can see here is that both fulfill their primary role of dealing with the water quantity, and they also protect local communities and houses from flooding, which is why you see a little bit here on the land and property value as well, on both sides. Now, if we focus on the right side, you can see that the nature-based solution comes with a lot more benefits in general, other than just the core benefit of flood protection. These are things like creating biodiversity, having the potential to create amenity space and benefits for health and well-being as well. And on the next slide, we see similar benefit wheels, as we call them, for the other of the 5 nature-based solutions that I've introduced in the beginning. Green parks, green walls, roofs, street trees, and what you can see here that really, that pretty much all of them hit all 12 benefits in slightly different ways, but you can really see how multifaceted they are. So we've been talking about the benefits that nature-based solutions bring. On the next slide, we see that it's not just multiple benefits, but it also affects multiple stakeholders. So yeah, a key challenge to the value of nature-based solutions is that, especially in the built environment, we often define value as in a very rigid understanding as direct financial value. But a lot of the value that nature-based solutions bring lie outside of these direct financial impacts and return on investments. In fact, what actually is happening is that these nature-based solutions provide many benefits to many stakeholders. So what we've done here is a little bit of a mapping, looking at all of these 12 benefits that I've mentioned before on the left side in this column here. And it's just an extract, so it's not all 12 here, but you see the headings and then a couple of sub headings there. These are basically all the primary and secondary benefits. And on the top, you see various stakeholder groups. And then we've mapped it. We've said, like, okay, what is a direct financial benefit? What is an indirect financial benefit? And what is just a general value that the nature-based solution gives to many of these stakeholders? So by doing these exercises, you can get a much more granular understanding of a situation in a given location with the chosen NBS, and we really think it's an incredibly valuable exercise to go through, because it really highlights a lot of the things that we often don't think about, but they are actually happening. These values do exist. Some examples here include, for example, lowering the risk of disruption of civic infrastructure, which has a direct benefit to local and national government, but also citizens. Another one would be increased health and well-being because of the nature-based solutions, which then in turn might benefit the NHS and health authorities as well. And just to give another one, if you have lots of street trees, for example, in a certain neighborhood, you might be able to increase footfall to local businesses, who then actually do see a return on investment there. So you can already see that there's a variety of intangible benefits, indirect financial benefits, and that exercise just helps you map that out a bit clearer. The next slide will already be my last slide. So this kind of brings it all together. We've created a value framework. This is all part of a report that we have written, which is called The Value of Urban Nature-Based Solutions. I will share that in the chat. I think it has already been shared at the moment. Great. So what this framework does, brings all of these things that I've just talked about together. We've mainly focused on step 1 and step 2, the initial assessment and developing a value proposition. Basically saying you need to define your desired outcomes, and based on these desired outcomes, you can then identify suitable nature-based solutions, rather than the other way around, rather than saying like, oh, I want a green wall, I wonder what it might be able to do. We advocate for the other way around. What is the value that I want to bring to the community, to different stakeholders, and based on that, you can choose the adequate nature-based solutions. You then, much in the way that I've just outlined it, you can then identify the benefits of these nature-based solutions, and you can identify what stakeholders there are, and then you just map it one against each other, the benefits against the stakeholders. Now, you can then take it a step further and identify potential value streams if you actually want to tie this up into some sort of financial strategy. As I've said, with the example of the footfall, for example, where business actually have a potential financial benefit, could you use these savings in a way to tie this into a financial strategy, and then ultimately develop a business case that takes into account all of these benefits and the wider value in all of these stakeholders. So if you want to know more about this, feel free to ask me a question, send me an email, and have a look at the Value of Urban Nature-Based Solutions report that we have written. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kai. Amazing timekeeping and pace to get through all that stuff, and really valuable um, framing. I think it's so important. So much of our work is trying to get companies and individuals to take a more holistic view, and to not just have that single-minded focus on carbon. And it's really helpful to see um, just how holistic nature-based solutions allow us to be. I hope all the policymakers on the call are really taking note of that this is a really important lever to broaden the impact of any sustainability investment. Fabulous. Thank you, Kai. And now, without any further ado, let's move straight on and hear from Tom.
Thank you so much. Really lovely to be here. My name's Tom Butterworth. As been said, I'm a director in Arup, and I lead our work on nature. Let's move on to the next slide. I want to give another piece of context. It actually really complements what we've already heard. The world is changing at a faster rate than any time in human history. Many of you will know this already. It's changing a whole range of ways. One of the ways is urban population, but there are other ways as well. With increasing urban population, we've also got other pressures. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And those can be expressed in a number of different ways. This is a different way of expressing the same results of that change, looking at our planetary boundaries, our safe space for living, our society and economy. We're now breaching 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. And the World Economic Forum identified 5 out of the top 10 long-term risks to our economy being nature and climate related. Why is this important in cities? Well, if we move on to the next slide, please. This is going to play out more strongly in cities than anywhere else. It's going to play out in terms of the heating, in terms of flood risk, in terms of how we are able to live in these cities. And this is just a very simple map showing what the average temperatures are now compared to what they will be. And it might think, oh, that's lovely. Instead of being in a nice sunny London, it might be like north of Spain instead of London. That sounds like a nice idea, doesn't it? But our systems, our cities are not set up to cope with that level of change, and yet it is coming. Next slide, please. Another way of expressing this is a slide from the Met Office, just looking at different scenarios under climate change and significant changes in temperature, the decrease in number of cold days, the increase in number of heavy rain and drought. This is really going to play out heavily in cities. Why is it playing out heavily in cities? If we move on to the next slide, please. Because very often they look like this. They're very grey. And what that means is that they're absorbing more heat. The runoff, the water comes off and runs off much more quickly. This impacts people directly. We've done some fantastic work on the urban heat, UHeat. You can find that on our website, and I can put a link in the chat if that's appropriate later. Looking at where these hotspots are, this results directly in, very sadly, people dying because it's too hot in our cities. If these cities are subject to climate changes we're seeing, this is going to be a significant issue. Or to put it another way, if we move on to the next slide, we cannot deliver against our carbon ambitions and our climate ambitions without nature. So the first part of this graph on the left-hand side is showing a carbon assessment to try and decrease carbon for a local authority. That first blue bar is looking after our existing green spaces. If we don't do that piece, we're not going to get all the rest of it sorted, no matter what else we do. The second graph is from nature, showing with those dotted lines how nature-based solutions, using nature to capture and store carbon to help us adapt to climate change, is going to be critical in bending that climate curve. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we've already heard our cities and our green spaces in our cities can do a huge amount for us. There's a long list of things they can do. And there was a fantastic study a couple of years ago, or quite a long time ago, looking at green infrastructure as a catalyst for economic growth. And again, I'll try and make sure the link is available. That showed that we can definitely see direct links both to the green infrastructure providing all of these benefits and the economy. That means direct links between the green spaces and how well our businesses are doing in our cities. And an old example, if we move on to the next slide, from I was going to say 10 years ago, it's more than that, 14 years ago. This was a study done in New York looking at managing the combined sewer outflows into the harbour. And they looked at comparing grey infrastructure costs with a combination of grey and green. And the combination was $1.5 billion cheaper than the grey-only approach. So yes, this is critical to help our cities adapt to climate change. It's critical to support our businesses, but it's also, if we get it right, cheaper than doing the other options. Now, we've done a whole load of this work in Arup. If we move on to the next slide, looking at, for example, greening large areas of London. So this is a project that we've done with a whole load of large landowners across London, looking at how we can link up parks, green our streets, green our roofs. And these do not have to be massive interventions. They don't have to be big green roofs or the whole street greened. We've got examples where it's just one lamppost that they've put plants growing up it, or pots like you can see in the picture here, supporting green space. All of this supports biodiversity, our nature, but it also helps deal with these other issues of cooling our cities for those heat effects, and also managing that surface water runoff. Now, what does that look like in practice? Well, there's a fantastic example of this in Sheffield that we've been working on. If we move on to the next slide, Zach Tudor in Arup is doing fantastic work greening our cities in Sheffield. And these are bigger scale pieces of work, but it doesn't mean that they have to be this scale. I just thought that some nice pictures would be a nice addition to this. When we're actually designing these, it means actually getting involved and getting into the water management in this. So if we look on the next slide, you can see a sustainable urban drainage system that we've been putting in place halfway through development. You can see how this is allowing water to track down through this system as the water runs and holding water back where we need to. So managing the water, managing the heating. We've done a lot of work on spongy cities, looking at how spongy our cities are, how are they going to be able to cope to that. Adapt to that increased rainfall. And we're also looking at what we plant into these spaces. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see what it looks like at the end of this. What we plant into these places, make sure that they're drought resilient, to make sure that actually they can cope with all of that future climate that our cities are going to be impacted by. And this creates fantastic places to be. It's not just green and blue infrastructure. If we move on to the next slide, there's pinks and yellows and reds, and it's absolutely stunning. It makes really lovely places to be, lovely places to spend time in. And also, really critically, this could look like an awful lot of work, couldn't it? But actually, the way we plant these, we move on to the next slide, please, is by using low quality, low nutrient soils, often lots of recycled materials, waste materials, as in waste from farm products, from beetroot production in this case, where we're putting that into the soil to mean that it's absolutely minimum maintenance that you need to do, and it can be cheaper to maintain than delivering a piece of grassland that you've cut every few weeks. If we move on to the last slide, of course, this also supports biodiversity in what is our newest ecosystem, our cities. They're the newest ecosystem. They're still evolving. And we have an opportunity to make our cities more resilient, greener, nicer places to live, as well as supporting the wildlife that's entering our cities. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And once again, impressive timekeeping. Thank you for that. Really great to see such practical examples. And of course, most of what you shared, I think, was in the more public spaces, but obviously those benefits would accrue to private enterprises that were doing up their own space in that same way. And you got to know that the people that are walking through those spaces appreciate that's having a positive effect on their quality of life. So really great stuff. Thank you to those of you that have posted some questions. Please keep them coming in the Q&A box, and also do cast your eyes over the questions we have and give a thumbs up to help us prioritize when we get to the Q&A. Next up, we're going to hear from Charlotte to share about Polypipe's smart blue-green roof solution that they've implemented in a retrofit context to deliver sustainable urban drainage benefits. So Charlotte, over to you.
Charlotte, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Sorry. So
You
yeah,
know.
it's a delight to be here today, and I think it's really chimed well with the previous speakers. You know, we've had a lot of discussion around the value of nature in urban environments and how we need to move beyond conventional SUDs, as Kai was saying, sort of beyond conventional drainage to really think about how we can incorporate all those multiple benefits of nature. And Tom was talking about, you know, cities becoming a kind of locus of the disruption that climate change will bring. And we sort of heard about sponge cities, and I like to think about the work I do at Polypipe as a civil engineering business that also support green infrastructure, and starting to incorporate technology into the engineered nature-based solutions in cities. I see us as trying to create smart sponges in our city spaces, sponges that are adaptive to climate change, because we know that we're putting nature into counterintuitive environments, you know, poor quality soil, lots of demands on that asset once we've implemented it. So, you know, it's great to put nature into urban environments, but we have to think about how we support it long term and ensure that it delivers the benefits that we've seen. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we want to create this focus on sustainable living and water management solutions for all urban environments. Next slide, please. And I mean, I just wanted to show a few images here of how these engineered solutions, you'll see them, you'll see the results of them everywhere, but actually it's that support mechanism under the ground that's really providing some of those benefits. And we use a technique called passive irrigation, which we've used on our retrofit roof in Greater Manchester, where we can store water below that natural asset and use subsurface irrigation. But it's when we combine it with smart solutions and weather data, and we can remotely control water between these assets, that it becomes so valuable. Next slide, please. And we just, yeah. So the smart green blue roof addresses the challenge of too much water and too little water. So, you know, we can understand how where we've got ground space at a premium, that we want to address the ecological and climate change crisis, we have to work with multiple stakeholders. So we worked in the instance of Greater Manchester with United Utilities, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and private stakeholders who owned the rooftop space to implement not only the engineered solution, but the smart infrastructure connected to weather data to allow the roof to discharge ahead of a storm and to hold back enough to irrigate the roof during the summer and the winter months, and to regulate that. If you could just transition through those next few slides, please. So it optimises opportunities to provide benefits at both ends of the water issues faced by climate change. So we're not actually designing water management now at rooftops to just run tanks from empty to empty. We're actually holding the water back to support nature. Next slides, please. So it is a groundbreaking climate and water resilience research roof, and it was installed in a retrofit area, which meant that we had to have super light substrate. We had lots of constraints on the roof. So actually the smart system came into its own because we were enabled to use passive irrigation, to use lightweight infrastructure on the roof, but also to hold back as much water as we could to irrigate the roof. So because we had to, you know, sort of trim down the amount of substrate that we had, a conventional roof wouldn't have been able to support the wildflower planting that actually was enabled on that rooftop scheme. And we've also been doing a lot of biodiversity research on the roof, and we had over 67 new species colonise the roof within the first 3 months of its installation, which is absolutely groundbreaking, including the Manchester blue butterfly. Next slides, please. So again, it is retrofit. That is a huge part of what we're hoping to achieve, because we can't just do this in new build environments. And this smart solution can actually be used under tree pits and under rain gardens, and you can connect multiple tanks. So the work we're doing with local authorities now is really to look at how we can reduce the energy use of buildings, reduce the energy use of the whole urban environment, and to start thinking about the whole cityscape as a smart sponge, and how all these systems can be connected together, and indeed to measure the performance of all these assets and pass water between them. When one might be thirsty, we can irrigate with another and connect this to rainwater harvesting. Next slides, please. So next slide, please. So the design of the solution itself enables us to really engage in source control. So we're keeping water as shallow as possible beneath that green asset so that we can enable the passive irrigation, because when we're doing passive irrigation, we can't use that technique in a really deep soil profile, which is something we're also engaging in a lot of research and development now, is to think about, can we incorporate that technique of subsurface irrigation in deeper profiles and deeper tree pit systems, for example. Next slides, please. And these are just an example of the capillary cones that we use to enable that wicking through the green asset. Next slide, please. And indeed, this is all recycled. So, you know, when we talk about sustainability, it's really important that we're not emphasizing, you know, the nature-based asset, but actually the solutions underneath them have to be, you know, sustainable as well, which is super important, because that's another part of what we're doing. Next slide, please. So just to share a few results of the Manchester roof, we obviously wanted to measure proper rainfall events, so things that United Utilities and water companies would be interested in, because the whole idea of this is to change the way we do things in Manchester and indeed in other cities. But in this pilot, it was looking at actually how valuable are these nature-based solutions in keeping water out of the combined sewer network. You know, how do we incentivize the return on investment of nature-based solutions? And we find that disproportionately it is in the drainage. It is in the water management function of nature-based solutions that you can really unlock funding. So we decided to discount anything under a 5 mil rainfall event, and continuous rainfall with no greater than 2 hours of dry weather was deemed a single event. So next slide, please. Just conclude with a few of these examples. If you just transition, yeah. So in the summer, because we're enhancing the use of water through evapotranspiration, the average reduction discharged into the sewer network was 90%, which is hugely beneficial if you think about how much water you're holding back, but how much water is actually being used to irrigate the green asset. And when we think about, you know, climate change and what Tom has said and what Kai, our first speaker, was saying, you know, it's not just about stormwater, it's not just about the urban heat island effect and how it affects people, but climate change is going to have a huge impact on the tolerance threshold of our nature-based assets. So while we're saying now, oh, we need to incorporate more nature-based solutions, they still constitute an added burden on our water usage. So we have to think about how self-supporting can we make them in the urban environment. These nature-based solutions have to be as self-sustaining and as low maintenance as possible, because the harsh truth of it is, if we don't support them with sort of intuitive, smart infrastructure, with the right kind of approach to stakeholders understanding their value, we won't get that sort of widespread uptake that we really hope for. And by combining this with smart drainage and smart water management, our stakeholders on this project could really see the value. And I'll just, if you just transition, I'll just show for the winter. So again, in the winter, because we haven't got the same evapotranspiration level, we can see that we've got a 44.5% reduction. So this is really interesting, because what we can do is then look at, can we actually use smart solutions to put some of that water in the winter into a rainwater harvesting tank? Can we actually hold that back to then use come the next dry spell? So because we've got that weather data linked to this system, we can actually forecast, you know, weeks in advance how we think that that nature-based asset is going to require that sort of intervention. And we're now looking into the next phase of piloting, where the sensors in the sewer systems of the cities will be able to talk to these roofs so that actually they won't discharge into an already overburdened network. So there'll be a decision as to where then that water should go. So it's not just a sort of easy decision when that water would discharge into the combined sewer. Next slide, please. So I think, yeah, just showing that, you know, you do get these peaks and troughs, and you do get periods and seasonality changes. And what we're going to find with climate change is that we're going to have to account for the erratic times. And nature-based solutions are incredibly resilient. But with these kind of approaches, what we can do is not squander the opportunity of when we have too much water and treat it as an inconvenience. And we can start really enhancing the multifunctionality of the assets that we do install, because If we think about the space constraints in our towns and cities as well, and the need to both retrofit but also to put new developments in with these kind of approaches, ground level opportunities, whilst they still exist, we have so many untapped opportunities at rooftop level. And it's really the next stage of unlocking the power of our towns and cities, because we will be building taller. We will be building more accommodation that is going to have, you know, amenity space. So it's really important that we start thinking about multifunctionality at rooftop level and how we can also extend that to talk to what's going on at ground level as well. So next slide, please. So I think I'll just sort of finish with just explaining that although it's a nature-based asset, the sort of complex engineering behind it, really, you can really see that actually this is a vital piece of engineering. And it's with this green engineering approach in towns and cities that we can actually move beyond what we consider to be a nature-based solution and really think outside the box and you know, push the boundaries of what we can do, which is what we did at Manchester. And that should be my final slide. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So I'll leave you with that, and thank you very much. This is just an image of the roof at Manchester, so from grey to truly green. And I hope that was of interest as to how we've incorporated these new approaches.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was fabulous. I really, personally, I really appreciate it when we can get stuck in and get a bit technical. And it's really so impressive how sophisticated that solution is. For you look at that green roof and just thinking, yeah, green roof. It's really, really welcome to have a better understanding of the myriad benefits that are coming from that, and the depth of that. It really should be easy to persuade building owners to go down that route, and for city planners to support those kind of investments. So let's certainly hope we see more of that. Thanks very much, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. Thanks everyone for all the questions. Keep them coming. Thank you for your embracing the task of voting up the questions you want us to answer. Do please continue in that vein. And now we're going to move on to our last presentation with Monica and Reem. Monica, I think you're going to get us started. So over to you.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. My name is Monica Esposito West, and I am the Business Development Manager at Earthwatch Europe. And I'm presenting today with Reem from Funding Circle. Earthwatch and Funding Circle have been working together to create new tiny forest projects in cities all over the UK. And I'm going to start my presentation today with a brief introduction about Earthwatch and tiny forest. And then Reem is going to tell you more about the details of our partnership. So next slide, please. About Earthwatch Europe. Earthwatch is an international environmental NGO, and our mission is to create a world where we live in balance with nature. We are champions of citizen science, engaging the public, non-scientists, in scientific activity, collecting data. And in doing so, we aim to encourage environmental education and promote positive behavioral change. Next slide, please. Tiny Forest is one of our most successful projects, and it is part of our Nature in Cities program, where we work to create healthier and greener cities and improve access to nature-rich spaces in urban environments. As the name suggests, with Tiny Forest, we plant 600 trees in small, tiny spaces about the size of a tennis court. And we use a special planting methodology called the Miyawaki method. With the Miyawaki method, we use no chemicals and no fertilizers and only use native species to an area. And the result is a very dense and very rapid growth. Our current aim is to plant in areas of high deprivation, areas which lack green spaces, in order to magnify the impact of our work. And we have now achieved an important milestone, having planted Tiny Forest number 250 in the UK, and our aim is to reach 500 tiny forests by 2030. So next slide, please. It's easy to see why tiny forests constitute such a powerful nature-based solution. We are making cities more resilient to the effects of climate change, and we are future-proofing local communities. Thanks to our citizen science sessions, we currently monitor 4 key environmental benefits for our tiny forest projects: carbon capture, flood mitigation, biodiversity increases, and thermal comfort, so the cooling effect of the tiny forests. But we also analyze the social benefits of our projects in terms of increased mental and physical well-being. Next slide, please. As you can see in our latest monitoring report, in 2023, we achieved a 65% faster infiltration rate, a 13-fold increase in the quantity of mean carbon stored, an increase in biodiversity, and 6 degrees cooler temperature inside the tiny forest compared to outside. And this cooling effect is particularly relevant when cities are battling with the effects of global warming and the urban heat island effect. Next slide, please. But having analyzed the environmental benefits of tiny forests, I would now like to highlight the business case for our program. In essence, tiny forest makes for a very cost-effective nature-based solution for companies because of 2 reasons. Because of the special planting methodology that we use, the Miyawaki method, we achieve a very high tree survival rate. And also, our tiny forest projects are very low maintenance. After the trees are established after 2 years, the forests pretty much look after themselves. Moreover, tiny forest is a great way for a company to live up to its sustainability commitments. And as we include corporate staff in our planting days and in our science days, our projects constitute a great team building opportunity. And you can see here our lovely friends at Funding Circle, who helped us plant 1,200 trees in Peckham during one of the most memorable days in the history of Earthwatch. It was so cold and it snowed for the whole day, but they managed to get the job done. And as you can see, they're still smiling at the end of the day. And I would like to conclude by saying that investing in tiny forest is such a powerful way for companies to give back to the local community. We're not just putting trees in the ground, we are creating a green space that will be cherished by local residents and will constitute a legacy for the local community and for generations to come. And with that, I would like to hand over to Reem.
Great. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. Thanks, Monica. And yes, I can confirm that was a very cold day indeed. Thanks for having me today. I'm Reem Akul. I'm the ESG manager at Funding Circle. So today I'll share a brief overview of our partnership with Earthwatch on the Tiny Forest project, starting with our approach to sustainability, how we chose this intervention, and then finally I'll share some outcomes from the project. So next slide, please. So first, a bit about Funding Circle. Funding Circle is a leading lending platform for SMEs in the UK. Since 2010, we've extended around 30 billion in credit to over 100,000 small businesses all around the country. Next slide, please. So the nature of our business obviously informs our sustainability approach. And in delivering our mission, we also want to play our part and have a positive impact in local communities and on the environment. And so we've identified climate and the environment as one of our 4 sustainability pillars or ESG pillars. And to be fair, the focus has until now been mainly on climate-related risks and opportunities. And this is mainly driven by regulatory requirements as well as stakeholder expectations. However, as more focus has been placed on nature and looking at things more holistically, which obviously makes sense, we've started to consider how we can approach nature-related issues in our strategy. So in terms of our operations, we operate out of our London office, and our lending platform is fully digital. So basically, as with climate, one key area in terms of our nature-related impact or dependencies really sits in our financed activities. So this means our lending to SMEs. And our SME customers tend to be very small businesses who operate in diverse economic sectors. So individually, they actually have a limited interface with nature. And, although, of course, collectively, it might look different. But what it means for us is that we have a very fragmented interface with nature. And so for now, if we look at our value chain, we can have little influence and there is no meaningful engagement approach that we can take directly with our customers, for example. And so instead, our approach is focused on beyond value chain mitigation. And the way we've decided to implement this is through partnerships. And so working with organizations like Earthwatch who have already developed and tested impactful interventions. And we really see this as no regrets actions so that we can take today while we refine our strategy, and also perhaps as importantly, while the wider context and the wider landscape evolves. Next slide, please. So what does the partnership look like? In 2023, we partnered with Earthwatch to co-fund 2 tiny forests in Peckham in South London. And then based on that success in 2024, we then co-funded another 5 forests. And this time, these were part of the Local Authority Treescapes Fund. So this is part of the government's Nature for Climate Fund. And the 5 forests are, in different areas around the UK. And in some exciting news, actually, Monica was telling me earlier this week that one of the tiny forests will be featuring to promote this year's Blue Peter Earthshot competition. So for those of you in the UK, you might know about this competition. So Monica has explained a bit how tiny forests work, and so I won't go into that level of detail. But if we go to the next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of the things we considered when we were thinking about potential partners and interventions. So as you can see on the slide, the first thing was alignment with Funding Circle's mission. And we love the quote from Tiny Forest when they say super tiny, super powerful. So this is how we feel about the small businesses we support. And we really love that parallel. So the forests, themselves may be tiny, but collectively they now make up a significant network of dense green spaces in ecologically deprived areas around the UK. And for us, it's a cost-effective way, as Monica spoke about, of having an impact. The budget spent for the 7 tiny forests was around 40,000. So this is what Funding Circle contributed, £40,000. And this is really made possible by the creative co-funding and match funding options offered by Earthwatch. So for example, here, it was through match funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which is public money, essentially. And so this makes it affordable for smaller organizations to contribute to something like this. And we feel our contribution goes a long way, and it's fantastic to be able to be part of something much bigger. It also allows us to engage our employees and to signal to stakeholders that we care about operating responsibly in a way that is, still proportionate to our business model. The next thing, and that's very important for us, is that the intervention is science-based and evidence-based. So tiny forests are based on an established forest management method. Also, the intervention is inclusive and it promotes citizen science, again, as Monica explained. So really involving local community members, schools, employees who can all take part in science days. And all of this data is then compiled in the impact report that Earthwatch produces every year. And I really encourage you to take a look, because it's quite comprehensive. And then another thing is that the intervention is collaborative. So again, Earthwatch works with a wide range of stakeholders to plan, design, prepare, plant, maintain, and monitor the forests, especially in the first couple of years. And this is obvious to say, but I think we can address these challenges much better working together, and this project is a really good example of that. And last but not least, the intervention has multiple benefits across social, economic, and environmental dimensions. So Monica has spoken about these benefits a bit, and so I won't go into detail, but just to finally wrap up, next slide, please. I'll just share with you some of the stats from our project. So these are for the 7 forests that we co-sponsored. So you can see here some of the numbers across the environmental and social impacts. But one interesting thing I did want to mention is that in addition to bringing some nature to urban areas that need it the most, the forests also work like living laboratories. So where small experiments can be run to help us understand the benefits really over time. And for example, in the case of our Peckham forests, so we had 2 forests which were planted next to each other, but using a slightly different planting method for soil preparation. And so this makes it possible to then compare how each side grows. And as you can see from the photo at the top, you can see that actually one side is doing better, and the trees there are a bit more dense and taller as well. So this is it for me. Thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to take questions as well.
Thank you, Reem and Monica. I have lots of questions, so I'm sure that our audience does too. I've seen a bunch of things come in already, and so I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna exercise my moderator privilege and just ask you guys to start, because then I think this segues potentially nicely into the most upvoted question. But I'm amazed to see that 40K for 7 forests. I mean, my jaw hit the desk. I would have thought this would be much more expensive than that. So I wonder if we could we unpack that just a little bit more? Maybe it's you, Monica, more than Reem, but was it so affordable because of economies of scale, because Funding Circle went for 7 forests? If a small company was to rock up and wanted to sponsor 1 tiny forest, is that something that's possible?
So in essence, the cost of every tiny forest project is standard. It is 32K plus VAT for corporates. But we try to make our projects affordable for small and medium companies by doing one of 2 things. Either we match fund, so we pool more than 1 funder, and so we reduce the cost for the individual funders, or we use various schemes, such as the one that we mentioned, the LATF government scheme, which makes forests much cheaper. So with that scheme, a forest comes up to 6K, for example. The caveat is that the locations are limited and have to be on the government list, but it's a great way for small businesses with limited budgets to come on board.
Yeah, I'm quite excited about this. I hope that we can help you just off the back of this webinar get closer to your 500 forests. I hope that there are lots of sustainability directors taking note. How many forests can you roll out in a year? Is there a limit, and does the money have to come all up front, or is it spread over a period of time? Curious as to the ongoing maintenance of the forests, and how is there an ongoing commitment from the sponsors? Or so maybe Reem, this is maybe one for you, but is that a concern, and how do you deal with that?
Thanks, Steve. So I don't know if Monica, you want to add anything on that, but from our perspective, obviously we want to build longer term partnerships. And so, well, we see kind of every step sort of is building on the previous one, and we like this continuity, and so we like to see this in the strategy of our partners as well. You know, there is in this case it was a one-off sort of commitment, maybe partly because, as Monica said, the forests are kind of almost self-sustaining after a couple of years, and so the bulk of the investment really goes in at the beginning, and this is when they need the funds, as you know, to kind of just kick things off essentially, and once the forests are put into the ground, it then kind of tails off a bit.
But we now have a range of long-term partners that have supported several projects, including Canon and Microsoft, and in essence, Tiny Forest is extremely scalable as a project. So if we know in advance that there is interest, we can then put more resources into widening the program. So for any questions or expressions of interest, do get in touch with me at the end of this session, and we can continue the conversation.
Okay, because yeah, I just can't help but noticing, I think it was Chloe's question about a FTSE 100 company possibly engaging, and so that would be potentially then a great opportunity for all concerned. Just maybe quickly then to wrap, I think you mentioned that a tiny forest is about the size of a tennis court. Is that a standard thing, or is there a range? How do they
That's
grow?
correct. 200 square meters, and it has to be that exact size for a scientific comparison, because as I said, we go back and we monitor the data from our tiny forests, so they have to be exactly the same size, and they have to have exactly 600 trees planted in them. So there is to be a uniform design in this sense. And to answer one of the other questions that are also in the Q&A, which species do you plant? Because we use this planting methodology called the Miyawaki method, we only use native species to each area. So a tiny forest in London will look very different from a tiny forest in Dublin, for example, but that makes the projects even more unique and relevant to the local area.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, so I did kind of say I wanted to link this a bit to the most popular question, and that's come in from Vascor, and it's, can the nature-based solutions be taken up by smaller organizations with tight budgets? So I think we've just established that that tiny forests are an option, but I think we need to broaden this out a little bit more. Can't help but thinking, Charlotte, that roof in Manchester cost more than a tiny forest, but not to say though that such solutions are not accessible to small companies. So maybe you could start. I don't know that, you know, your typical clients, I'm assuming, are larger buildings and that there's economies of scale in play, but please.
It's a real mix, and I'm one of the product managers at Polypipe, and you know, we work with the likes of, you know, Tom's organization, Arup, and you know, there's a wide variety of different schemes, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that we're not all doing big, you know, glass vanity projects in the middle of central London or Manchester, and a lot of the work I do is on sort of scalability of solutions to suit different budgets. You know, the block roof, for example, was about £16,000, but that was because it was the first of its kind. So now you're looking at something more like £7,000–8,000 for something like that. So first mover kind of pilot schemes are always a little bit more expensive because you're finding your way, you're putting in more than you need in terms of instrumentation, just to make sure that you're validating the data. So the sort of the smart element is always something that we're really sort of trying to get the control in terms of how many sensors do you need? Do you actually need this to be smart, or can you sort of have every other tree pit or every other rain garden in your city being smart, because you don't need data from every single thing that you do? So it's about the why, the when, the how. A standard tree pit with a geocellular solution can be as inexpensive as £1,500 in a very dense urban environment. I think that the problem we have in this country is that a lot of solution providers when they're sort of first movers, you know, the tree pit scenario was probably the worst in this country. For about 20 years, we had 1 or 2 providers, and it was up to about sort of £15,000 for a single tree pit in an urban environment at one point. It got pretty ridiculous. And thank goodness there's a lot more players in the space. And I mean, I think Tom's a really great person to kind of comment on as a designer. You know, you've got hundreds of different companies you can work with to realize these solutions. I'm sure you've had those kind of horror stories and then got to something really good where you've got into the groove of, you know, how you go about things.
Yeah, Tom, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah. So the nice thing about this, very often these green spaces are modular, so they can work on a huge scale. And so, for example, we did a lot of work and we helped set up an organization that looks at green walls and vertical meadows and how they can both support biodiversity, but they can be put in at almost any scale with very, very little wider infrastructure. So you can go right down to, I was advising an organization recently on individual pots, you know, that you're putting in. So if you're in a place where actually you've got very limited scope to change the paving, you can still put in pots to change things, to create some green space. And if you do that and work together across that group of organizations or the group of businesses in that business park, you can have a huge impact on that local area, huge impact on our health and well-being as you walk into that space, let alone anything else. And it's really transformative. So I think we need to not be put off by thinking, oh, it's got to be this huge landscape scale piece of work to have any benefit. We will see change just by putting in these smaller places around where we're working and living, and it happens very, very rapidly as well.
Thank you.
I think just to add, you've got to think about the cost of getting it wrong. I think just to add to what Tom said, you know, when you're working in towns and cities, the cost to replace trees and green roofs and rain gardens, it's quite expensive for a local authority to go in and redo like the Greater Green project in Sheffield. So I think you have to kind of balance the initial outlay with the long term. You're not going to have to go back and do an expensive redesign.
Very important. Sorry, if you don't mind me.
Of course, go ahead.
That's absolutely critical. What often happens is we ask that question of the green stuff, but we don't ask that same question of the grey stuff. Yeah, we don't ask, well, what happens if it goes wrong with our tank under the ground? Or what happens when that tank can't carry the amount of water that we wanted before, or whatever it might be. And actually green stuff, you can go in and change it quite easily. It's quite, you know, you can change the structure of your green infrastructure much more easily than digging up a tank underground to manage your runoff. So absolutely, we need to think of what goes wrong, what goes right. But let's not try and hold green infrastructure to a higher standard than we do already for all of the grey stuff we put in place.
I think that's really fundamental shift in the way we look at the world, isn't it? Is that our default thinking is towards the gray solutions, and we need to put this on a different footing. Charlotte, just quickly again, because once again I've been surprised at how affordable these things are. Can I just ask you about on a roof solution? Does that presuppose that there's already a good roof to build upon, or if somebody was looking at it's time for us to fix the roof, they could go to you and you would that would be the whole job?
We try to do it as a package, and we work with waterproofing specialists as well. So we guarantee the whole project as a warranted package, everything from the waterproofing to the vegetated layer. And I think that, you know, there's 100 different ways you can do a green blue roof, from sort of a basic unsupported rooftop with sedum all the way through to a smart green blue roof with that passive irrigation. And I think it's where you get the most benefits and at what scale. So I would say sort of roofs at 400 meters square and above really suit this. But if you've got smaller spaces, you can do something more modest, but also really bring in some biodiversity there as well.
Fabulous. So obviously, I hope building owners are hearing this, but for everybody that's renting, I think here's a strong message to send to your landlord as well, and start to take a bite out of your own scope 3, as well as just making a much nicer work environment. So fabulous. Thank you. Thanks for that. Let's just go on to the next question. It's also attracted a lot of interest from Lizzie, and this was a question that I was going to be sure to get to around measurement. So Lizzie writes, how are you measuring the success of your urban nature-based solutions interventions over the long term, given that many of the benefits, particularly the social ones, are difficult to quantify? And I think there's this links back to the previous question around, that person in a small business that wants to get the company to fund an NBS and how they're going to persuade them that this is the thing to do. Now, maybe Kai, could I come to you maybe in the first instance, and then maybe it'd be great to hear from you, Reem, as to how you persuaded your company to get on board with this project.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to take that one. I think there are several angles to answer that question here. I think the first one would be similar to kind of what Charlotte said. Not every project needs to have the full monitoring in place and the full evaluation of everything. It's just, it comes back to that question: why are you doing this in the first place? What's the outcome that you're trying to create with that nature-based solution? And often that doesn't need to be hugely complicated in terms of like, how do you value this? Like, if you want to create a nice green space for the local community to hang out and to have their benefits of well-being. We have, from centuries of architectural and landscape practice, we've got quite a good understanding of the requirements for such a place. And you can then, if you want to have a survey on with the people who use that space, so it can be quite straightforward. So yeah, again, look at what the outcomes are, and then you can decide on what do you need to measure. I'd also say that there is by now quite a lot of research out there that validates a lot of these claims in terms of the benefits that nature-based solutions bring, such as on water retention, flood risk reduction, mitigating overheating, health and well-being benefits, noise reduction, all of these kind of things. There's a wealth of research out there. So at this, in a similar way, you don't need to prove it over and over again at each single site. You at some point can just trust the research and trust that this is going to work. If you really need to do some sort of valuation exercise, you can do that. There are some tools. If you go onto the report that I introduced as part of my presentation, there is a little bit of an overview of kinds of different tools that you have. There is, for example, a tool called the Nature tool. There is the environmental values lookup tool. There is the BEST tool. And these things are evolving. There are things out there that you can do. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that, and I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Kai. Reem, could we hear if you're able to share sort of how you made the case internally, and did you have to justify with some benefits?
Yes, I think, of course, with as with any company, you'd have to get the budget approved, get this, and so there's always competing priorities as to what you can do with this money. But yeah, I definitely agree with Kai that in terms of the approach of thinking first about what the outcomes are that you want to sort of to find or to reach, and really it will look very different for different types of companies. I think you probably would want to start with what they call materiality assessments, so really to kind of identify those touch points with nature, those the interface. But for us, as I spoke to in my presentation, we were really focused on beyond value chain mitigation. So so in the sense that there's no direct kind of if you like, connection with the financial sort of value of a project like this. And so it's about thinking about what other things make sense for us as a business, what resonates, for us as a business. So I think the fact that it's a nationwide project, that it really reaches communities across the UK, that it's very close to sort of local communities, local areas in all of those urban locations. I think that really resonated. So it's really finding those things that kind of make sense for you as a business. Obviously, engagement for our employees is another thing. So it's articulating this kind of in a way that you can then communicate first internally and externally as well. Yeah, so it's really making it mission aligned, I would say, because then it becomes much more organic the way that you kind of can go about it.
Well, and I think it's self-evident, isn't it, that intuitively it's so obvious the benefits of these projects that hopefully, as Kai was saying, we don't need to waste resources on measuring the obvious, and we can just get on with making our urban environment a better place. Okay, let's move on. The next question attracting a lot of votes is from Duncan East. And Duncan writes, many businesses are based on industrial estates, which consist mainly of large sheds and car parks. These areas are biodiversity dead spaces, given that these businesses are mostly tenants with minimal control. How can they create corridors for biodiversity across these sites and benefit from ecosystem services, such as local cooling from increased vegetation? I think we've sort of touched on this. I think, Tom, you have talked about a single pot. Do you want to elaborate maybe just a bit more on that specific case?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that's slightly different again, if that's okay. There's some fantastic work that's been done in London by I think the Green Roof company, John Little, looking at a housing estate. Now, it's different, I understand, from an industrial park, but it still has some of the same requirements. You've got somebody coming in paid to cut the grass, the little bits of grass that may be there, someone to spray off areas under railings to stop the plants growing up in amongst it all. And they took that cost, they looked at the cost of doing those things, and instead of using it to do those, they used the same money to actually start purposefully growing things up those railings, purposefully putting in place wilder areas of grass and so on. And to start with, actually, in that case, they got more complaints to the local authority than ever before. They started working, listening to the local communities, and in the example, it would be the local businesses seeing what they actually wanted. And now they've got, when we were presenting this at a conference a few years ago, and it wasn't John stood up and spoke fantastically, but then it was one of the local residents that got up and said, I love my estate. I'm here because I wanted to say this is fantastic. This is where I want to live. I'm proud of what this is, and I'm now part of this fantastic, beautiful space. So often there are roots in that are already there that we just need to uncover. Now, how do that as an individual business? That is tricky. Having those discussions with the landlords is crucial. Getting the pots in place as a starting point, but we can go beyond that. We can start thinking about, well, there's already money going into cutting the grass. Can we do something different with that? Yeah. It's an exciting journey to go on.
And I think that, in most such estates, there will be tenants associations, there will be fora where tenants can come together. And I think it's evident in the long term that there's a strong business case for the building owners to be making their facilities more green, to attract tenants that are committed to being net zero. It's all about the scope 3. And if they can, I'm under no doubt, I'm sure you guys would concur that a building with a green roof is going to be more commercially attractive in the years ahead as companies, tenants are looking at reducing their own footprints. So I think there may just be a question of more enlightened tenants helping their landlord to be more aware of these opportunities and knowing that their tenants would support movement there. Tom, you want to come in?
Only just to say, I put some links to some of the evidence on this, and in there, in the chat, and in there's really strong evidence that the people renting those properties stay longer in those properties if there's green space in and amongst around it. The value that you, as a landlord, you can ask is higher if you've got those high quality green spaces around your places. So there's huge incentives for the landlords if they understood, and we can help them understand that. I'm not suggesting that they can go out and then increase all of our rents. That wouldn't help, would it? But there are really good business reasons for making these spaces green.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we've got, I need a few minutes at the end to say thanks and to share some upcoming events. So that we've probably got about 7 or 8 minutes left. We still got 10 questions. So that means it's the rapid fire round. I'm going to read out the questions because on the recording, our audiences can't see the questions, so we can't get away from not doing that. If I'll read out the question, if somebody's keen to answer, maybe either electronically or physically, give me a wave, and we'll see if we can get through a bunch more of these questions before we run out of time. So the next one I want to go to is from Sarah. To what extent is the concept of shared value, creating both financial and social and environmental value, being applied to, I guess, the industry? I'm assuming that's the nature-based solutions industry. How are we measuring and capturing the value created to different stakeholders? So we kind of touched on this. Does anybody want to add anything more?
I just want to reinforce a point that was made earlier. Have a look at the nature tool. It's a really useful tool. I must put my hand up. I've been involved in the development of it, but I think it's a really simple way of measuring change, and it captures both the social and also things that will hit the bottom line for those organizations in those businesses.
Great.
And maybe one thing for me, just to reiterate what I've said at the beginning of my presentation, mapping benefits against stakeholders is a really valuable exercise, and it definitely helps with that.
And good to do that up front, I suppose, so that you kind of managing expectations all the way through the project, and then you can more effectively track it rather than as an afterthought. You're building in those measurement requirements all the way through. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, next up, question from Zoe. I work in the property department of a large food retailer. Our challenge is how to improve nature around our stores without encouraging pests. Good one. How would the presenter suggest I can make the case for more soft landscaping whilst keeping good hygiene?
I'll make a very quick comment.
Okay, Tom, yeah.
Choosing the plants carefully so that they're not going to support those species is really critical. So if we're talking about rats or we're talking about other pest species, and that's absolutely possible in that, a good landscape architect will understand that, will be able to identify the plants that are going to not harbor those pests and be able to create green space in amongst these spaces. So for me, it's all about that choice of planting and then being really clear about the delineations of where the planting is and where you've got some other space, whether it be where people are moving through or whatever it might be.
Monica, have you had to deal with this around the tiny forests? And if so, how have you managed it?
But tiny forests use a very natural method of planting. So what we do is use minimal maintenance. We train a team of volunteers recruited from local groups. We call them the tree keepers. So we train them to look after the forest for the first 2 years, making sure that weeds are at bay and we don't have any infestation, so we were saying. And after that, the forest is established and pretty much looks after itself. But I think that the key is that initial upkeep of the forest and looking after it well.
Thank you. And thanks, Zoe, for that question. Okay, another question from Lizzie. Thanks for sharing. I have a question for Tom. Incorporating nature-based solutions in urban environments requires many different stakeholders across the public and private sectors to work together. How can we make sure the right stakeholders are involved from the outset and that the right collaborative governance outcomes are achieved? Excellent question. Might be not just you, Tom, but welcome.
Yeah, I'm happy for others to chip in. I'll give a very short answer. This has got to be done on a case-by-case basis, and you need to look at who's impacted and who's benefiting from that green space and include them in that discussion, as well as the landowners. Business improvement districts in London have done a great job of trying to bring that together. Some of the local authorities have as well. But I'd love to hear from others on the panel because I think they've got will have similar experiences. It's always challenging, but critical So yeah, really important to put this front and center.
Do I have a volunteer?
I mean,
I
happy
can-
to come in. Again, I mean, Tom basically said it. You need to look at who's impacted and who's benefited, and I don't think it's a hugely complex task, but you just need to make time for it. And at the beginning of a project and throughout, just sit down and have a think and do your assessments. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Kai. Charlotte?
Sorry, I just come off mute. Yeah, I mean, I think the stakeholder engagement piece is hugely important, because whether we're working with local authorities or private clients, one of the major challenges that we find is that if you haven't had that engagement at the early stages and people aren't on the bus, then there's really expensive redesign required. And for example, when I work with local authorities, the first person I want in the room is the highways engineer, because particularly if we're putting urban nature-based solutions in difficult trafficked environments, I think you have to be conscious that not everybody wants that or in that particular way. And we've worked on rain garden projects where we've had residents applying for drop curbs so they can't go in and things like that, because nobody's taken the time to actually explain the benefits. And one of the reasons why I get very excited about the possibilities of actually measuring performance of these assets is that this isn't just a tool for sort of university nerds. I'm a university nerd, I'm doing a PhD, but I don't just go away and hold the data and squander it. It's an opportunity for us to actually communicate with stakeholders, hey, actually, this stuff that your local authority are invested in actually does what it says on the tin. It's actually managing other things other than just looking pretty, or you haven't just lost your car parking space for no good reason other than someone wants a wildflower patch opposite your front door. So it is important, and I think the cost comes into it as well. I think it's really important if you can actually almost value engineer before you get to the point of value engineering, to keep everybody really on board with the fact that this is the best solution within the budget. For me, is always really critical. So I hope some of that's been helpful.
Thanks, Charlotte. We're going to have to stop there. I never really thought we'd get through all 10 of those questions, but good effort. Thanks, everyone. Maybe if you don't mind taking on maybe some written answers in the last few minutes. Charlotte, there's a question there from Matilda that might be a good one for you. And please do, if we can knock off a few more, that would be great. Huge thank you to all of our speakers. This has been a really, really informative session. I've learned a lot. I'm sure that all of our audience has as well. I hope that you will be amply rewarded with lots of outreach back to you for your projects, so that we can see some real impact ourselves from today's session. I'd love to see 100 tiny forests off the back of today. Thank you very much also to the audience for being so engaged. Lots of fabulous questions. Really always love to see so much engagement in the chat. So thanks very much for joining us. And of course, also a big thank you to One Carbon World for their support of the whole series. We're going to have a feedback survey that's going to pop up in the chat maybe now. And also there will be a pop-up once we close off the webinar. Do please take a moment to fill that out for us. We really appreciate your feedback. And now, yeah, right on the buzzer. So let me just tell you about a few upcoming things. We're currently hosting a 3-part addressing energy-related emissions webinar series. There'll be a link coming into the chat for that. Our annual SDG Flag Day is returning on the 25th of September. We actually only have a handful of flags left to sell, but if your company is engaging around the SDGs and you want to shout about it, do get in touch and join us on Flag Day, just to raise awareness of the SDGs. Our annual summit is coming up on the 1st of October at the London Guildhall. It's our biggest event of the year. We still have a few in-person places to attend. If you are a Global Compact UK network member, places are free. If you're not a member, Prices are a bargain. So do please look into that. It'd be great to see you there. It's going to be a fantastic day. Next slide. We are also running a series of interactive webinars to help equip the SMEs in our network with knowledge and tools to advance social sustainability. Those webinars are kicking off next month. Great to have you join us. And finally, you may have heard about the UK Business Climate Hub in partnership with Planet Mark. They're conducting a UK net zero business census. And I think a link for that will be in the chat. The deadline is coming up soon, and it'd be great if you could engage. And I think with that, we better stop. Thank you all very, very much again, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.